I don't know if you heard the story about Shelby, who invited her little friend to Bible study and worship one Sunday. Her friend Jennifer. Jennifer didn't grow up in a Christian home, had never been inside of a church building before, never attended a worship hour or much less a Bible class. And she went into Bible class with Shelby, and they talked about Jesus and Him feeding the 5,000 miraculously, plus the women and children. And after learning about this exciting Bible story, she came into the auditorium and sat down. And a few minutes later, a man came up to a podium similar to this one, and he held his hand up something like this. And Jennifer leaned over to Shelby and said, "Shelby, what does that mean?" And Shelby said, "That means we're about to start singing praises to God." And we've been blessed this weekend with great song leaders and great singing as we've been blessed to sing praises to our great God. A few minutes later, a man came to the podium, and he held his hand something like this and bowed his head. And Jennifer, having never, said a prayer before, didn't know what this was, leaned over to Shelby and said, "Shelby, what does this mean?" And Shelby just said, "Well, it means we're about to pray to God. Not that you have to do this, but sometimes we do." A few minutes later, a man came to the podium, and he took off his watch, and he laid his watch on the podium. Shelby was the preacher's daughter, and Jennifer leaned over to Shelby and said, "Shelby, what does that mean?" And Shelby said, "That doesn't mean anything. Don't pay any attention to him ever taking off his watch and laying it on the podium and ever looking at it." You all have been such an encouragement to me because many of you have listened and been a part in person or maybe online a number of the lectures, which admittedly some of them went a little long. Well, I have a treat for you this morning. I don't plan to go as long as I have maybe in the last several sessions, in part because I have a flight to catch this afternoon, getting back to Montgomery, Alabama, and then on back to Wetumpka, Alabama, which is where I live outside of Montgomery. I want to say, before I get into the lesson, once again, thank you for everything you've done for me this weekend, for the invitation from the elders, for all the food you have blessed me with. Yesterday's meal here at the building was great. I've had the pleasure of eating with the Mableys a couple of times and others. Thank you so much. And I truly mean it when I say, if you find yourself in the great state of Alabama, come see us there. I'm not a native of Alabama. I'm an Okie from Muskogee who married an Alabama girl and has been there for the last 23 years. But we would be happy to have you come and see us. I understand that you've taken part in the relief effort for some individuals in Ukraine, brethren who were there, and maybe non-Christians, and you've teamed up with some from the Dalraida congregation and John Kackelman, and we do the same thing at Wetumpka, where I am. We team up with them as well. We have a great relationship, so would love to have you come and maybe help out with that work sometime. That would be great. Come see us. And also, we would appreciate your prayers at Apologetics Press, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the defense of New Testament Christianity. By the grace of God, we've been around for nearly 45 years. I did not start working with them when I was 3 years old, but I have been there for the last, by the grace of God, the last 23 years. We do appreciate your prayers, and again, come by and see us sometime. If you ever, I will ask this, or say this, if you ever are thinking about supporting any kind of nonprofit work, we have different individuals who support us around the country, and we're very grateful for that. We mostly are thankful for prayers that people pray on our behalf, but also if you can help us. We are currently in a fundraising campaign where a very kind donor out in Texas has challenged us with a matching campaign. So anything that we raise between about September, the end of September through the end of December, he's going to match up to $200,000. And what our plans are to use, hopefully it won't cost that much, but to use much of that, maybe all of it, for a Bible distribution center. We are an organization that has about 10,000 square feet of space, about 3,000 square feet of warehouse space, and we are in need of about 10,000 feet of warehouse space. And so our hope is in the next year or so to be able to build that based upon the funds that we receive. We've been printing the Apologetics Press Defending the Faith Study Bible that many of you are aware of for the last 4 years now, and we just recently came out with a smaller Bible that's 1,500 pages, weighs 2 pounds rather than 2,500 pages and weighs 5 pounds. It only has about 80 pages of study notes in it for especially non-Christians and maybe young Christians. And it's a Bible that we're excited about for a variety of reasons, but number one, I suppose, not only because it is the Word of God, but because we're able to disseminate it in bulk for $7 a piece, which I don't know how long we're going to be able to sell those for $7 a piece before we start losing money on those, but right now we're able to, and my wife and I, we purchased 3 boxes, 30 Bibles, put it in our van, and now we are able to give those out, as we go to restaurants or see people maybe who are in need, and one of the many things we can give them is a Bible. It was a little harder to do that with the $40 hardback study Bibles. These smaller Bibles are not the comprehensive study Bible, but they do have a number of pages of helpful notes, especially for non-Christians. This morning we're talking about, for the next few minutes, wonders of God's creation. And I don't apologize for talking about God's amazing creation because God created these things that I think He expects us to acknowledge Him as the creator of. Whether we're going to a farm and seeing a number of different animals that you often see on a farm, or going to a zoo like many of us thoroughly enjoy going to, or maybe to a park to feed ducks and geese, and even when those geese might bite our little fingers, we still return to those parks to see the geese and the ducks and enjoy God's amazing creation. Maybe you just have a bird feeder outside of one of your rooms and you look outside the window, just like last night when we were at the Mableys, I saw a few hummingbird feeders, if I remember correctly. Hummingbirds are amazing creatures. When I think about whether the food that we eat or the creation that we see out here in Phoenix, Arizona area, or the animals that God created, the things that God has created for us to, in part, enjoy in this life, I believe it's very appropriate for us to think about them as a foretaste, as we sometimes sing, of glory divine. Meaning, if there can be times on this earth when you can eat fried crappie, I think heaven's going to be better than fried crappie. When you can enjoy, some kind of meaningful relationship with a wife or husband or mother or father or son or daughter, I think what we have here and how that can continue and even be greater in the afterlife, a foretaste of glory divine. When I think about the pleasures that we get to have here on earth, meaning getting to study God's creation, which, as the psalmist said, that we have been allowed to do. Read Psalm 111 and see how God expects us and wants us to investigate His creation. To see 17-year cicadas come out of the ground and metamorphosize into a flying cicada. Well, that's just fascinating. Maybe you just see a turtle and think, well, that's pretty cool. Or maybe some lizards that you catch, and maybe you find a baby frog and you put that baby frog in your belly button and you take a picture of it. And I normally don't show belly button pictures. I just don't. But when there's a little baby frog in it, I can't help but say, that's just sweet. I mean, who doesn't like a good dog? And you say, Eric, what are you doing? Well, I'm wanting you to see that God has created some amazing creatures. I mean, even when those creatures, they're calm and they look at you and maybe they're kind of wanting a biscuit or a dog bone or something, and maybe they want peanut butter, and this is what they look like when they eat peanut butter. They enjoy some of the little pleasures of life as well. Now, I don't apologize for talking about wonders of God's creation. In 8 of the first 9 chapters of the Bible, numerous animals are mentioned. I'm not suggesting that that's the main theme of Scripture. Certainly not. We've talked about that a few times this weekend. God does mention them. He created them. And one fascinating study is the book of Job. And in the book of Job, many people miss the fact that there are 39 other chapters besides chapters 1, 2, and 42. Chapters 3 through 41 are speeches by Job. by Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, Elihu, and then God speaks to Job in chapters 38, 39, 40, and 41 out of a whirlwind. And he talks to Job. Job is suffering immensely, most likely like none of us have ever been through or heard of, to that extent. And he wants to know why he is suffering, and God speaks to him out of a whirlwind miraculously and talks to Job about his creation. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? And at the end of chapter 39, at the end of chapter 38, all of chapter 39, most of chapter 40, and all of chapter 41, he talks to Job about his animal creation. So when we ask the question, well, is it appropriate in a worship hour to talk some about animals? Well, I just respond, well, God did. I mean, God taught Job a significant lesson, one or more lessons, that Job wasn't expecting to receive. It often is the case, is it not? When we ask questions to God or about God, or maybe we wonder about, Jesus and some of His responses to questions in Scripture, you have to admit, that's not necessarily how I would have answered that, but God's answer is much, much better than my answer. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, Isaiah would say in Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. And after God spoke to Job about his creation, Job's answer is, I know that you can do everything. Job chapter 42 and verse 2. And that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You ask, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me. God taught Job lessons by talking about His creation. And what we looked at Friday night is reasons that creation makes sense. To believe in a creator, that matter demands a maker, life demands a life giver, that intelligent life demands an intelligent creator, and design demands a designer. That complex, functional design demands a designer. I know some of you look at a giraffe and maybe you think, how was that animal designed? I mean, that's one of the goofiest looking creatures on the face of the earth. I mean, look at that, the long legs and the long neck. I mean, imagine if my legs were about 3 feet longer and my neck was about 5 feet longer. I mean, you'd think that's one of the most unusual human beings on the planet, but this is a giraffe. Really amazing. I mean, he's kind of goofy in that he's got a tongue that can reach 18 inches long. I mean, imagine walking around with an 18-inch long tongue. That'd be kind of difficult, I suppose. Chameleons are pretty cool, by the way. Chameleons have tongues that are twice as long as their bodies. They're interesting animals. I think one of the most interesting things about giraffes is, and the most amazing things, is that they have a heart like we have, and they have a neck like we have and a brain like we have. I'm not saying we are equals. We are made in God's image, whereas giraffes are not. But giraffes have to have oxygen in their blood circulating from their heart to their brains in order to survive. And yet their brains are about 8 feet higher than their hearts. Can you imagine the blood pressure of a giraffe? I mean, you might think you have high blood pressure. I think my dad is on blood pressure medicine. The giraffe has blood pressure that is about 3 times as high as the average human and about twice as much as any other animal. Of course, I suppose it better if it's got to pump blood up against gravity 8 feet in the air. I mean, it has a heart here, about 6 feet of neck. You got a brain on top of that in your skull. But then what happens? What happens when the giraffe bends down to get a drink of water or to eat something from the ground, though maybe normally it's eating acacia leaves from the tops of trees and wrapping that big, long, awesome tongue around those branches and leaves and twigs. But wait a minute, if it's pumping against gravity at 3 times that as the average human and then lowers its head, well, let me ask you this. What do you think would happen to me as a 48-year-old man who is not in the greatest shape in the world if I just decide to preach with my head trying to touch my knee? And I just stay there for, how long do you think it would take before I started feeling what? Dizzy. Or I might what? I might just pass, you could preach a sermon for me, couldn't you? I mean, you could just pass out because you got all this blood rushing to your brain. How does this go to this and then not fall over and do this and be eaten, by a lion or a crocodile or something else? Well, I'll put this in quotation marks. It just so happens that giraffes have a complex functional aorta that goes from its heart to its brain that has these specialized valves in it that they close when the giraffe bends its head down to the ground to get a drink of water, for example. And by the way, giraffes can drink more water in one drinking session than a camel can. That is, they can have their heads down drinking water for several minutes at one time, all the time staying on high alert, not feeling woozy, not about to pass out, not being dizzy. How can they do this? Because it is equipped, it is designed with this system of valves in this main vein from its heart to its brain. But you might think, well, Eric, how does it get any blood to its brain? Well, it's because it has a network of blood vessels right underneath the brain called a network of the carotids that, when its neck is bent over and bent down, it slowly gives the brain just the right amount of oxygen that it needs. Does that sound like happenstance to you? Does that sound like maybe, just trial and error over millions of years that did this? Evolutionists admit that the giraffe has a complex pressure regulation system. I mean, evolutionists admit this. A complex pressure regulation system. Unique valves that prevent overpressure when it lowers its head. A network of blood vessels that help stabilize blood pressure as the giraffe moves its neck up and down. And a heart that is about 2 feet long, when full of blood, weighs about 20 pounds, powerful enough to send an adequate amount of blood 8 feet upwards against gravity. How do the mindless, if there is no God, no creator, nothing in the universe to create the giraffe with intention and intelligent design behind it, how do the mindless, purposeless, random processes of time and chance adequately explain unique valves, a heart, lungs, and arteries, all being just the right size, as well as a wonder net of the carotids that is underneath the brain that keeps just the right constant blood pressure in the brain, whether the giraffe's neck is raised or lowered? Even more difficult for evolution to explain is how all these sophisticated body parts came about simultaneously. Evolutionist Robert Wesson said, all these had to be accomplished in step. And they must have been done rapidly, that it could all have come about by synchronized random mutations. Strains the definition of random, an evolutionist says. The most critical question, however, is how the original impetus to giraffeness and a million other adaptations got started and acquired sufficient utility to have selective value. The observer must be often tempted to suppose that organisms have responded to their conditions and needs more purposefully than strict Darwinian theory can allow. You see what an acknowledgement of amazing, complex, functional design can even force ardent evolutionists to consider? Or what about the animal that we call the eel, the electric eel? We have a book in the back about some of these creatures called Wonders of God's Creation. Electric eels, they can literally shock you and shock the daylights, as we would say in Oklahoma, the daylights out of you and send you to the hospital. If you want to see some interesting footage, just Google. Now, you got to be careful Googling and searching things on YouTube and such, but you want to search some interesting footage. Search animals that have bitten electric eels and see what you'll find, like an alligator or a crocodile dying because of it. Well, how does an eel go from being a non-electric eel to an electric eel if evolution is true? Electric eels, they have these the 3 pairs of organs, 6 in all, which make up nearly all of its tail region, about 80% of its body. And these these muscles are known as electroplaques. They're arranged like almost like when you want a flashlight, maybe you put one battery and then another battery, and maybe if it's a long flashlight, 3 or 4 batteries in it. Well, their muscles are kind of arranged like batteries, and they don't contract like normal muscles. That is, they give off these electrical charges, and they're able to do so at will, even being able to shock something at up to 600 volts, enough to stun a horse. Again, how do they do this if they did not originally have this ability in the beginning? How did the first eel evolve from a non-electric eel? How did all the batteries of the first electric eel, battery-like muscles that is, get put in precisely the right place to produce the kind of electricity that it produces with being able to send signals from its brain through these special nerves to its battery-like muscles? How do people explain logically the electric eel's ability not to shock itself, but can shock the daylights out of you? Did it know that it needed to, quote-unquote, evolve this special layer of insulation? I like that word, insulation, instead of fat. It's a special layer of, honey, I'm not getting fatter. I'm just getting more insulation. We like insulation around here. It has insulation that keeps it from shocking itself, but can shock you. Oh, you may say, well, that looks kind of like a squid or maybe an octopus, but it's called a cuttlefish. A cuttlefish that looks like almost like something out of a Batman movie with eyes like that can spew black ink out of its body like a squid or an octopus, has bluish green blood, has 8 tentacles, 6 of which you can see, and 2 that you can't, but it occasionally blows out like a birthday party blower. The cuttlefish, one of the more amazing animals on the planet, because these creatures, they're able to, can you imagine being able to do this as a human being? They can swim next to a rock or a barnacle and actually begin to make their skin look like and almost kind of arrange it like, imagine if you could do that with a church pew that you're on there. Oh, that'd be, we're talking, almost sci-fi kind of stuff here. Like, wait a minute, this sounds like the X-Men. No, this is a real creature who can do something like this. Not only that, then they begin to just mimic their surroundings as far as kind of acting like them or looking like them. When they swim next to seaweed, they move their arms in a certain way to kind of act like the seaweed. By the way, you can go to the Apologetics Press website, type in cuttlefish, and you can see an amazing video about these creatures. And by the way, I meant to mention this earlier. Most all of this information we've covered this weekend and a ton more is found on our website for free in electronic form in terms of articles or videos. There are hundreds of them. In our Bible class period that we had this morning, where I know I went fairly rapidly through a lot of material, there's a whole series of videos about the Bible, evolution, and time. So if you were to go to our website and search in the search bar something like Bible, evolution, and time, there's a series of about, I think, 12 to 15 videos in that series that has a lot to do with what we covered in the Bible class hour, plus articles. Again, just wanting you to know that at apologeticspress.org, there's a ton of information, including about what we're dealing with this morning. Cuttlefish. Scientists actually tested these creatures. They've been studying cuttlefish for years because they're fascinating creatures. Even the U.S. military has had scientists studying them, trying to learn about their camouflage abilities. And they put these creatures in fish tanks. They painted vertical lines on the fish tanks, put these cuttlefish in there, and you know what they did? They began to mimic the vertical lines in the fish tank, and they moved their arms up this way. And then they put them in different fish tanks with horizontal lines, and the cuttlefish began to splay their arms, their tentacles out vertically. But even more amazing to that, like some other animals, this creature can change its body, its skin color to different colors. And the last I checked, it was scientists have learned that they can change their bodies to up to 40 different colors. I can't even name 40 different colors, y'all. I mean, my wife can. She can talk about pink and salmon, and I mean, she's got about 6 colors of purple. I'm like, what color is that? Oh, it's kind of a little bit of a purple. I mean, I know green, red, brown, black, white, and blue, and yellow, and maybe a few others. But 40 different colors at will. And you know what's interesting is that some researchers believe that this creature is colorblind. Now, try to figure that one out. That it knows how to change to different, if you get a chance, go to our website, one of the latest Discovery magazines for kids. This is one of ours that we have in the back that's free. This one's on the Grand Canyon and the layers in the Grand Canyon that we offer proof for, that let people see that there's evidence that those layers would have been laid down during the global flood in Noah's day. Those are free in the back, by the way. But my colleague Kyle Butt just wrote recently about the octopus. You need to read. Listen, I don't care if you're a kid or an adult. You're going to love to read the Discovery issue on the octopus, because those creatures are as amazing, if not maybe more amazing, than the cuttlefish. What about the biggest creature we've ever known to live on the planet, the blue whale? I mean, this is a creature, as we mentioned yesterday, that can reach nearly 400,000 pounds, has a tongue that about 20 of us could stand on at one time if we wanted to, but we wouldn't want to do that because we wouldn't want to get swallowed like Jonah that we mentioned in the Bible class hour, and has enough blubber to keep it, insulation, fat, blubber, okay, had enough of that this morning, enough blubber to keep it from freezing in the frigid cold temperatures, hundreds or thousands of feet sometimes down in the ocean. I mean, an amazingly designed creature that, what evolutionists, are you aware of the evolutionary explanation to blue whales? And I've heard, I was reading part of a book recently by a sister in Christ actually who claims to believe in evolution and even has bought into the evolution of whales. The evolutionists contend that animals evolved in the seas and then they evolved into land creatures. We'll just say, maybe a dog-like, fox-like creature that then drifted back into the waters, and their tail became a fluke, their nose went from here to here on top of their head, and they went from being about 30 pounds to being 400,000 pounds. And that's supposedly the elementary, quick version of how whales evolved. I would contend that is what we would say maybe in Oklahoma and Arkansas, hogwash. There's no evidence for that. But if you refuse to have God in your knowledge, then you come up with some crazy ideas. And yet it is absolutely logical to believe that the kind of design that we see in the world around us, and we're only dealing with a few small examples, or in the idea of the blue whale, big examples of design demanding a designer. If the universe shows complex functional design, then there must have been a designer. The universe shows complex functional design. Therefore, as the syllogism goes, it's logical to conclude the universe must have had a designer. Listen, as the psalmist said, the great and wide sea in which are innumerable teeming things, living things both small and great, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. It's logical to come to that conclusion based on a study of the universe, based on a study of the stars, Psalm 19, 1 through 4, based on a study of the animals that swim in the sea and the animals that you might find down in, well, we'll just say down under, like duck-billed platypuses. Duck-billed platypuses. Are you kidding me? I mean, these are some of the more, well, this is how we talk about them in our book. It's about the size of a house cat with fur thicker than a polar bear. It can store food in its mouth like a chipmunk. It has beaver-like tail, web-like feet like an otter. It has a bill like a duck, spurs like a rooster, and it lays eggs like a turtle and produces venom like a snake. If there was ever an animal to call unique, it would be the duck-billed platypus. A lot of people have never heard of the fact that the duck-billed platypus has a complex electroreceptor system in its bill. It doesn't act like a dumb duck. Not that ducks are dumb, but it has a complex electroreceptor system in its bill. Well, what is that? Well, do you know what duck-billed platypuses eat? They don't eat, hamburgers and pizza. They eat little tiny shrimp-like creatures. They eat worms. They eat tadpoles. And how are they able to find them? When they dive into the water, they close their ears, they close their eyes. Plus the water's murky anyway. How are they finding their next meal? Scientists now know that these creatures use their electroreceptor system to detect even the faintest of pulses from tadpoles and find them oftentimes under the little sandy area at the bottom of rivers or maybe shallow parts of lakes. Who gave this creature this amazing design? I love what John writes in Revelation 4, "You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they exist and were created." And as we noted in the Bible class hour, mankind has known, has no excuse not to know, should know this, because since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that people are without excuse. Now, does it hurt my heart to think of children growing up in homes where they're not being taught to acknowledge God's existence because the universe demands such? Yes, it hurts. Do we, as God's people, have a great responsibility and an opportunity to tell the world, to declare God's glory among the nations, as the psalmist would put it? Absolutely. I've been so guilty in most of my life, I think, of just not recognizing how great our God is by way of some of His creation that I have just taken for granted. How many times I have seen bluebirds, blue jays, cardinals, or maybe seagulls, or maybe bar-tailed godwits, shorebirds, and not considered how absolutely astonishing their design is. I mean, this is a little 1-pound bird that you might see if you went to a beach somewhere, and you might think, oh, okay, I might chase it for a minute and just see, or might not even think twice about a bird that weighs about as much as a stapler, that can fly over 7,000 miles on one journey without ever stopping. I mean, there were scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey who tracked these shorebirds, a few of them. One in particular they named E7. I'm not for sure exactly why they named it that, but they dubbed it E7. They tracked it flying from New Zealand to the North Korea-China border. It didn't stay there very long. I'm not really for sure why. And went from the North Korea-China border to Alaska. So maybe there was just a stop there, and then we go to Alaska, and it stays there for a few months. That was about 9,000 miles. And then returns home on this 16,000-mile journey, which there's some birds that even fly farther. Over 7,000 miles in 9 days, averaging over 30 miles per hour without ever stopping. Now listen, I don't think I could jog a mile at this time in my life without feeling like I needed to stop. I'll walk the Atlanta airport. Have you ever been in the Atlanta airport and gone from Terminal A to Terminal D, E, or F? By the way, have you ever wondered why when you get on an airplane, the last place you walk to before you get on an airplane is called a terminal? That just seems like, I would rather it be called something happier than that. That just doesn't. But I can get tired walking from, Terminal A to Terminal D or E. This bird traveled over 7,000 miles. I mean, I would have at least stopped in Hawaii for a few days. I've never been there before. I'd kind of like to. And I think even just as amazing, if not more amazing than this bird's stamina, is its sense of direction. Because what scientists, they know, they have the evidence for it, they have tracked it, they have observed it. It ended up right where it started from 16,000 miles and several months earlier. Without a map, without what I always use, a GPS. I don't know who this woman is in my phone, but she's always telling me where to go. Without, I think I've gotten to know Glenn and Becky well enough this weekend, without a sweet wife telling us where to drive, telling us where to go. I appreciate Jana. I mean, listen, she knows how to get to work. She knows I know how to get to work every morning, but sometimes the feet are on the dashboard, sometimes the hands are up here, and Eric, watch out for Eric, you need to what? Well, the sweet wife can tell us where to go. This bird ended back up where it started months earlier on a 16,000, well, it's not like it had roads that it was following. It's going over open ocean, nearly every bit of that, 99.9% of it. How do you explain the amazing design of the bar-tailed godwit or many other animals? I don't have time to talk about woodpeckers that can bang their head against trees hundreds of thousands of times in their life and never get hurt. Oh, it just so happens to have some of the best tissue, cartilage that you've ever... We can't even create what woodpeckers have between their beaks and their brains. If we could, put that all around our cars and just run into stuff all the time and really never have a problem with it. Complex functional design in the material realm demands an adequate explanation. It demands a designer. Let me fast forward to this. I want to show you that evolutionists have admitted that things look designed. In National Geographic a few years ago, they talked about the sophistication, clever devices, and brilliant design, and how insects offer an embarrassment of design riches. And then they said this: they regarded the insect on bended knee in admiration because such mysterious and complicated design. I think Romans and Paul says something about the idea of sadly worshiping the creation instead of worshiping the Creator. Atheists like Michael Shermer, New York Times best-selling author, probably one of the world's most well-known atheists, who debated my colleague about 2.5 weeks ago in Montgomery, Alabama. In his book, Why Darwin Matters, said the design inference comes naturally. The reason people think that a designer created the world is because it looks designed. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Michael Shermer, for telling us that. How can you get design without purpose, intelligence, and deliberate planning? When you look up the word design in the dictionary, you read it's a particular purpose held in view by an individual or group, deliberate purposive planning, a deliberate undercover project or scheme. You see, deliberate. After defining design as a drawing, sketch, or graphic representation of a detailed plan, the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language noted that design may be defined as the purposeful or inventive arrangement of parts or details. A design, logically, is preceded by a deliberate purposive plan, a detailed plan, or an inventive arrangement. So says the very words definitions by dictionary after dictionary. A design, by definition, cannot be the effect, by definition, logically speaking, of time, chance, and unintelligent random accidents of evolution. Design is the effect of the purposeful planning and deliberate actions of an inventor or designer. By definition, design demands a designer, and one with some measure, a great measure of intelligence. We serve an intelligent Creator who not only is great because His creation testifies to His greatness, but is absolutely awesome all the way to His loving nature. Because when we messed up the creation that He made in making man and woman, male and female, Adam and Eve and their descendants, when we individually used our free will to forsake the great grand Creator who loves us so much that He stepped out of heaven to take the punishment of our sin that we deserve, but that He took on our behalf because He loves us so much, He wants us to be with Him forever and ever. Let me ask us in closing, as Jesus' invitation is offered this morning, what do you think about the opportunity that you and I have 365 days a year until Jesus returns or we breathe our last breath? Are we using those opportunities to serve Him, to worship Him, to honor Him, to glorify Him, to love Him day after day? As we examine our hearts at this very moment, we need to ask ourselves, are we a follower of Christ? Are we a Christian? Have I confessed Jesus as the Son of God, turned away from sin, repented, and been born again, been washed, been baptized into Christ, Galatians 3:27, for the remission of sins, Acts 2:38. And if we have, that's just the beginning. We're babes in Christ. That Peter says we are to have a longing for tasting the things that God has given us. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And so we are going to not be of the mindset of the world who wander aimlessly in this life, but we are going to be dedicated in our service to God. Not just on Sunday morning for an hour or two, but 168 hours a week. Yeah, I know we sleep part of the time, but whether we are at work, whether we're at home, whether we're playing on a ball field, our mindset is, I am a servant of Jesus Christ. I want to honor Him with my thoughts. I want to honor Him with my words. I want to honor Him with my work. I want to honor Him with my life. I want to honor Him with all of my actions. And when I mess up, by the grace of God, I'm going to keep confessing that sin that Jesus, whom I'm going to continue to confess, will forgive me of if I continue walking in the light, 1 John chapter 1. If you've wandered from the path of light into darkness and have fallen away, Jesus is calling you home today as we stand and as we sing.